Mr. Frank Caldwell. Mr. Frank Caldwell served in World War II. He is a part of that greatest generation. There's a quote in Tom Brokaw's book that I was able to look up, and this is a quote. It says, "And when the greatest generation accepted responsibility for something, they also accepted all the consequences of that decision, whether good or bad. They were no generation of whiners or excuse makers. They took pride in personal accountability." That's a great description of that generation, my father being one of those. Frank Caldwell is a native of North Carolina, born and raised in Maiden, North Carolina. Frank graduated from Maiden High School in 1940. He went to work building B-26 bombers, and after a discussion with Mr. Caldwell, found out that he possibly even worked on an airplane and built an airplane that my father was a flight engineer on. Frank was drafted into the Army Air Corps at the time, before we had an Air Force, and Bob, I think that was 1947. Yes. So it was the Army Air Corps, and he was stationed with the 485th Bomb Group in southern Italy. On July 30th, 1944, while on his 44th aerial combat mission, Frank's bomber was shot down. It was on a mission over Budapest, Hungary. 4 members of Frank's flight were killed, 6 survived on a crew of 10. Frank spent the next 10 months as a POW in Stalag Luft 4D in Poland and was forced to march 700 miles across Germany while they were moving as the fronts moved throughout the theater. Following his release from POW camp and discharge from the military, Frank attended the North Carolina State School of Design and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture. Frank opened his own architectural firm and was a member of the National Council of Architectural Registration Board. Frank is one of 9 brothers who served in World War II and the Korean War. He recently celebrated 65 years of marriage to a lovely lady on the front row, Miss Virginia Caldwell. And also supporting Mr. Caldwell today is his son. Ben is an active employee with Duke Energy. His wife, Dean, and daughter, Lacey. So this is Mr. Caldwell's family here on the front row with him. We are very fortunate to have Frank share his wartime experience today. Please help me and give a warm Duke welcome to Mr. Frank Caldwell.
Thank you. First, let me thank you for this opportunity to come and visit with you today. I think the speaker had already recognized my people up front. My wife, Virginia, a companion of 65 years. Bruce, who worked with you, your organization. Dean, his wife, and Lacey. Glad to have all of you. At this point, I'm 4 months shy of being 90 years old. So when you get that old, your mind sometimes has a tendency to slip a little bit. So I try to exercise my mind a little bit. For example, when I bend over to tie my shoes, I try to think of what else I can do while I'm down there. I'm told by people up front of me that there's 3 stages to getting old. First one is, for a man, you forget names. The second stage is, you forget to zip up. And the third stage is, you forget to zip down. So, you know what road you're going to have to travel that way. So, It's an honor to be invited to speak with you today, and it warms my heart to see such a group of people come out to enjoy and participate in Veterans Day. As we gather here, we should remember that World War II veterans such as myself are only a part of a long life of service members who have served their country since its founding. So this is a time to honor all the brave men and women of all wars who put themselves in harm's way to protect our liberty. So as I stand here today, I'm standing on the shoulders of a generation of brave men and women, many of whom gave their all for their country. I want to share with you a picture or two, if you would. This is a picture of my family, the 7 brothers who were in World War II at the same time. This is my picture right here. Now, this one and James and Frank. James preceded me as a prisoner of war. So we had 2 prisoners of war, and this young man here got killed on Okinawa in the run-up to secure that island. So we were just a part of 16 million men and women who served in World War II. Now, of those 16 million, 450,000 got killed, 120,000 became prisoners of war. Now, I have to say that the Air Force bore the brunt of most of that. Of the 120,000 prisoners, 75% of them were Air Force personnel. So that'll give you some idea what flying was all about. The model you see here on the table is called a B-24 Liberator bomber. It was the first bomber that had the tricycle landing gear. You see the 2 landing gear here, and it had a nose gear. Now, it differed somewhat from a 17 in that when you landed this plane, you landed on the 2 back wheels and put the nose down. If you were in a B-17, you landed on the 2 wheels and put the tail down. So it was 2 different ways of flying. So you had to, crews had to get used to whichever way they chose to fly. So after our basic training and completion of all our Army trade schools, they gave me a 5-day furlough home. Now I was in Texas, Laredo, Texas. My orders were to report to Salt Lake City. So I went from Texas home, Salt Lake, Chicago, and Salt Lake City, within 5 days. That's the last furlough I ever got. So you can see they were really pushing us along. So when we got to our base in Utah, I met my crew members here. Now, I'd never seen any of these people before. You see the pilot, the co-pilot, the bombardier, and this radio operator. I'll be talking about him. This is the tail gunner. I'm the little fella in the middle here. And we have, this is a ball turret gunner, top turret gunner, and nose gunner. Now those correspond to here and here, and then in combat I would man these two waist guns. So when we completed our training, they deployed us overseas, and the combat crews proceeded to Lincoln, Nebraska, and there we picked up 73 brand new B-24s like this. Now the WWII had picked those planes up in Willow Run, Michigan, and flew those things into a base, and we would pick them up and go overseas. Now they made 28,500 of these B-24s. So we on our bomb group used up 273 of them. To give you some idea what casualties were like, on one mission south of Berlin in 1944, the 8th Air Force lost 80 of these planes on one target. 80 planes and 800 men, all of them shot down. Now what they were bombing was a synthetic oil factory. Now, President Roosevelt had 5 assistants during the war, and one of his assistants was General Marshall. The assignment for the Air Force was to, number one, knock out their oil facilities. And that's what we concentrated on. Knock out their industrial capacity by going after their ball bearing factories, their marshalling yards, and their aircraft factories. Now, if you think about that strategy a little bit, when I was a POW and walking the back roads of Germany, I would see tanks sitting beside the road and fully intact, but they couldn't move. No bearings. So every time one of a ball bearing factory was put in operation, or an aircraft factory, we would go and bomb it. We also bombed their marshalling yards when they would gather up their troops and their tanks and so forth. We would come and bomb the marshalling yards and disrupt their transportation. So when we were ready and finished all our training, they deployed us overseas, and we picked up 73 of these planes and flew them down the southern route, down to Natal, Brazil, across the Atlantic to Dakar, North Africa, and back up across the Sahara Desert, and back to a little in the Mediterranean Sea to Tunis, North Africa. That's Tunisia. So that's a little state in Africa. So all of our flight crews arrived safely at that destination, and we had 4 echelon groups, ground crews. One of those ground crews was on the USS Hamilton, and it got torpedoed right off the coast of Africa. German dive bombers, and we lost 450 men. That held us up there for quite some time, 30 days to be exact. During that time, the officers' club ran out of liquor. That was bad news. So So they sent our plane down to Cairo, Egypt, to pick up a load of liquor because we had Bombay's cargo bins in the Bombay. Well, when you took off from Cairo, it blew a tire, and that meant you couldn't land on the wheels. You had to go belly up, or wheels up and come in on the belly. We landed the plane right alongside the runway, tore the plane up, didn't break a bottle of whiskey. So with that, we got a new plane, and it was a silver one. They didn't even have time to paint it properly. So from there, we moved over to our air base in Italy. Now, the Army Engineering Corps had purchased a couple hundred acres in and wheat field with a farmhouse, and they moved in and put down a metal runway, an interconnected metal runway, and built us a wooden control tower and pitched our tents, and that's how we lived at that point. So we were ready to fly missions. Now, if you permit me, I'll take you on one of the missions. If you were in the 8th Air Force, you flew 35 missions. If you were in the 15th Air Force, as I was, you would fly 50 missions. As I mentioned to you, I was on my 44th one. Now, what a mission means in essence is, what it gets down to is what warfare is and what it means for someone to participate in it. So I'm going to kind of lead you through a mission here, if you'll bear with me. On the morning of July the 30th, 1944, our crew was scheduled to fly its 44th mission. The target was a German aircraft factory in Budapest, Hungary. At the briefing room, as you see in this picture, this is the headquarters had already did reconnaissance work, and they had all laid out for us the headings and everything, which you'd see along here, and then you'd see how the planes were to be lined up. Now, on the way, we're going to see these little bursts that you see here. Those are all flak batteries. So that's what you have to fly through when you get close to the target. So in the briefing room, and you'd see that large map, and then it was flight positions that give you timelines and tell you when you're going to meet up with your escort and all of that. And we had, when we would get ready to take off, a flare would be sent out from the control tower, and you would get your plane cranked up and everything and ready to go. And then when you get another flare, you would taxi, and then another one, you were ready to go. Now, in the meantime, you'd have to put like 2,800 gallons of gas in this plane and 10,000 pounds of bombs. So you might know that when you're going to get hit in it, that you're either it's going to be pretty hazardous. So as we approached our target that day, we were in this position right here. Now, when you line up, this plane, this one, and this one has the northern bomb sight. If that lead plane gets knocked out, we were flying deputy lead, so we would slip over. If that one got knocked out, then this one would slip over. But we were in that position when we got hit. It took out on this display here. First it hit this engine and took it out. That whole wing caught fire. Simultaneously, another burst took out this engine. That put the whole fuselage and everything in flames. This wing melted off here and went flying off into space. And as we went tumbling down, we collided with this plane down at the lower level. So what happened then, when that flak bursted right outside there, I was at this waist gun here, and it blew me back across the fuselage over here to where I could see the other side. And I got back over here, and everything was on fire. Now the radio operator was laying down over this little hole right here, taking pictures of the bomb run. And while he was down there, the plane blew up again at 13,000 feet after we were in a spin. And from here back, 4 of us were back in the tail end, just floating around. So I had to pull him off of that hatch, escape hatch, helped him put his parachute on, and told him to jump. And he hesitated. No, you jump first. So I went first. He came out second. As soon as I got out and got my parachute open, I could see tracer bullets coming at me from the ground. So I started pulling the shrouds on my parachute and moving myself back and forth to so I wouldn't get hit. But they knocked 2 panels out of my parachute, and then I started to fall faster. In the meantime, I had a chance to look around briefly, and the tail end of my plane was sticking straight up out of the ground, and the tail gunner and the ball turret gunner didn't get out, apparently. So when I came out of the plane, I went out straight out the bottom, or I thought it was the bottom, but it was upside down. So I was looking into a formation, planes about, and they looked like toys. So I must have been around 1,000 feet when I finally got the parachute open. The parachute was taking me, the wind was carrying me along. I just got right over the Danube River, and alongside the Danube River was a high voltage power line, like comes out of your power plants. And I could see myself getting fried on that power line. So when I got to it, I reached up and pulled the shrouds of my parachute, lifted my feet up, and I missed the top strand about that far. Then right next door to it was a 3-story group of apartment buildings, 3 stories. I landed on the roof like that on this side. I reached back up to hang on. The wind grabbed a hold of the ridge cap. The wind caught my parachute, and down across that roof I went. Fell into a tree 3 stories below, and that's the last thing I remember until I was kind of foggy, and German conversation was going on. I couldn't understand what they was saying, but about that time I started to move, and a big black shiny boot landed right on my chest, and I started to move some more, and I was hurting at that time, and then someone stuck a muzzle of a gun right on the end of my nose, and I didn't move anymore. So they picked me up from there and marched me through the streets of Budapest for about 3 hours. Now, in the meantime, people had already come out of their air raid shelters, and they knew how to hurt you. They would, one soldier would be holding one arm, one the other arm, and just people all around, and they'd run in and get right in front of you, spit in your face, slap you, and give you the knee in the groin. And so that was one of their favorite ways to punish you. But they also, people would come out of their houses with frying pans, sticks, anything they were getting, and just maul you with it. Now, I was lucky that they didn't kill me. My bombardier had already been hung from a lamppost. My radio operator had got shot coming down his parachute, and we were in bad straits. So that's sort of the way they treated you. Once I got to where I couldn't walk and they was having to hold me up, they took me down to the Gestapo headquarters. And the first thing they did was sent me back to the first aid station. The nurse patched me up, treated my burns and the wounds, and sent me back up for interrogation. When I got to interrogation, the German officer was sitting behind a desk, and in front was a so-called preacher. He said he was an interpreter. Now, the officer couldn't speak English, so he was interpreting back and forth. When he put my dog tags down in front of him, my first name is Levi. First question the officer had, "You Juden?" I said, "No." I knew what he meant. "Are you Jewish?" So, anyway, the so-called preacher was doing asking the questions, and I wouldn't give him any answers other than my name, rank, and serial number, which I was supposed to do. Then the officer wasn't satisfied with that. After several questions, he put me off into another room and posted a guard on the room. And at that point, here come through the door one of the biggest guys I think I've ever seen. And he had to stoop to get through the door. And his idea was that he was going to work me over and I was going to give him some information. Well, he did that. But finally, when he gave me an uppercut and busted my lip and knocked two of my teeth out, and then he just took off his hat and threw it down in the floor and stomped it and left the room. So they sent me back down to the aid station again, and nurse stuck my teeth back in and fixed me up. And from that point, then they decided I wasn't going to tell them anything. So they put me in a truck and sent me over to political prison. When I first got there, they put me in a cell with my co-pilot. And the first words he asked, well, who are you? I said, well, you ought to know. And then he understood. So in a little bit, they came and took him out. And then they came and took me out. I don't know exactly what they did with him, but they took me across the way to an execution place. Now, it had a wooden wall that was shaped like that, with a wooden post with leather straps on it. They strapped me up to that pole and put the belts around and so forth. And I looked out there, and there's the firing squad. So the next question was for this so-called preacher. He was there, and he walks around in front of me, and says, Mr. Caldwell, you have any last words? And I said, no. About that time, somebody pulled a black hood down over my head. I heard them old bolts go seat themselves, and this is it. So for some reason, they didn't shoot. I assumed they were still trying to get information out of me. But anyway, from there they put me into a cell in my cell. It was about 6 feet wide and about 8 feet long. Every 3 or 4 days they would come and interrogate you, take you up the hallway to interrogate you. If you didn't tell them anything, then they'd up your punishment again. So at one point they put me in a cell that was completely dark, no lights. I don't know how long I was in there, but if I could feel around the wall, it's just greasy, sticky, and water on the floor about 3/4 of an inch deep. I don't know how long I was in there, but when I came out of there, I don't believe there was a place on my body that I could have touched with a pencil eraser that didn't have some kind of insect bite. So they just, that's the way they just ramp up your punishment. I was in the cell, solitary confinement for about 30 days. On about the 3rd week, the Allies came over on a raid. Now, I wanted to see those planes, so I had in my cell a little cot with a steel bottom, with steel mesh in the bottom of it, and a wooden water bucket with water, and a latrine bucket, and a little stool that was bolted down to the floor. Now, in that stool, I could sit on it, and I drew me out a checkerboard, and when they'd bring my food, I would take a little ball and ball it up, and make one person, and then put the crust on the other end, and then I could play checkers back and forth. Well, when those planes came over, though, I took the mattress off, stood the cot up to the window that was high in the back, and when the Allies dropped their bombs, I hollered, "Hooray!" and that was a mistake. Out in the corridor, they had a guard that would parade up and down the corridor, and he opened the door and came in and beat me up with the butt of his gun, took my bed out, and from then on for the next 5 days, all I could do was just stay on my feet. I wasn't allowed to even sit down on that stool. If I sat down on the stool, he would come in and beat me up. Then later on, I guess it was about 4 or 5 days later, but every day in that sequence, they would come and set food down at my door to the cell. It was hot food and you could smell it. Oh man. And then they would come and pick it up and take it away. So it's morning, noon, and night. This was a procedure. I didn't get anything to eat the whole time. So on about the 5th day, I just couldn't stand it anymore. And if the guard couldn't see me visibly, I'd get beat up. So on that day, I just had all I could take, and I just said a little prayer, and I said, Lord, I'm down here, and you're up there. I need some help. And it just like my feet just went out from under me, and I just flopped in the floor. Then, I don't know how long that I was in that state, but the next thing I heard, it just sounded like an airplane. Just started way up in the sky, and it's going around and around, and it got louder and louder, and just like it exploded right in my cell. And what it was, I later determined that it was someone had set the food down again in front of my door. And for the first time in 5 days, they opened the little roll-up door and gave me the food. I remember what it was to this day. It was split pea soup. I gobbled that stuff down, and I just couldn't keep it down. I went over and up-choked it. So then after that, they decided in Budapest that they had 65 people in the prison camp there, and once they get that many, they would then take you to a prisoner of war camp. So they loaded us into 65 of us into a prisoner of war boxcar. That was designed in World War II for 8 horses or 40 men. We had 65 people in that car. The problem was it didn't have any toilet. So for the next 5 days, we didn't get out of that car. We were on the road, traveling first couple of days in the daytime. Then we got strafed, so they then would park us on the sidings, and we would travel at night. So at that point, we were getting up close to our prisoner of war camp that you see here. Now this is a little railroad station that we call Keith Heidi that we got off on. then the idea was to take us to this prisoner of war camp here. So when we got off the train here, crossed the railroad track, headed for camp, they put the guards behind us, and you can see the police dogs in this photo here. So each one of us had a Red Cross parcel that they'd given us when we left Budapest. Now they wanted those Red Cross parcels. So what they did is put the dogs in behind us, started us out in a trot, picked us up to a full run, and you had this Red Cross parcel under your arm. So you either saved your Red Cross parcel or you got dog bit and they were shooting behind you. So everybody dropped those parcels. Now, those parcels had soap and toothpaste and different things in it that they could trade on the black market for almost anything. So then they would come back and pick those things up. On my trip, one guy came in with 13 dog bites, and problem was they didn't give him any treatment for it, so we had to lay him out in the sun, roll up his pants, and finally he got healed up. Now, at our camp, the structure of it was get this one. Yeah. As you can see here, these are the barracks. Now that little line right there, if you were in this camp and you put your foot on that, it was about 10 inches off the floor, off the ground. And if you put your foot up on that, the guard tower with a machine gun would pull down on you and shoot you. So, ironically, one day I was in this camp, and my friend from the same hometown was over here. He was walking around in his compound. I was walking around in mine, and I saw him across the way. And I hollered to him, and lo and behold, it was true. So then on, we would converse back and forth across the way. So in that barracks, you would have 5 rooms, 6 rooms. Now, in each room, you'd have 23 people. Now, that got really to be a problem, because you didn't, when you got anything to eat, you see that down here where I've outlined it in red, the bowls, you'd send one person to the mess hall to get the food. Then he would come back and we'd divide it up. It got so bad, people bitching at each other, that we came up with a method that one guy would divide out the food and give all the rest of them first choice. And that kind of settled that problem. So, that really evened things up. But they would turn the water on and off. It was on 2 hours a day. Now, in the meantime, we were building tunnels out in the compound here. But what we would do is they would line you up like this every day and count you off. You see that little spot right there? That we had what they call a chicken coop. It was slanted like that, and we built it up in the top of it. Had a rod where you could hang buckets on, and then on each side you could put a person on each side, and we'd take that thing out and put it on the same spot every day. And while we were there, they would move the dirt off the tunnel, go down in there, fill up the buckets, and put them on the rod. And then when we went back in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we'd put it back in a barracks, and then we'd fill our pockets full of dirt overnight. When they let us out the next morning, we'd feed it out in the compound. We had a problem with every time the Germans would miss a bed slat or two, they would have an inspection. So we'd shift the slats around from one room to another and get them confused and then steal a couple of them. And so that's what we were using to prop up tunnels with. We worked on that thing for months and had it outside the fence, the entrance to it, and all ready for people to escape. And it came the biggest rain in months. And the guard was walking around the compound with his dog and fell in the end of the tunnel. Nobody got out. So they put somebody in the tunnel that came out right in the middle of the compound. So we were at work all the time, just confusing the enemy, and that was our job. But sometimes everybody didn't work on tunnels. We had a person that we called the man of confidence, and everything went through him, and he in turn would contact the commandant. So in the meantime, I busied myself with doing some work like this. That I had, if you look at that, you'll see this is the name of my crew. In order to do this, I would pull blankets, pull strings out of the German blankets, and that's my crew and my plane and the number of bombs and so forth. And over here in this little plaque, I put everybody, my crew number, everybody's name. You can still read it. So that's one way I busied myself. The other way, we didn't have an economic system, but we had to create one. So what we did is the basic economic unit was 1 cigarette. So if, in my case, I was the barracks barber. Now I had a razor and 1 razor blade, and I could take that razor blade and squish it around in a glass of water and sharpen it up, and I could cut hair. So I was a barber in my group. So I could get 2 cigarettes for a haircut. Then I could go around and trade them cigarettes or chocolate bars or whatever. And I fared pretty good that way. But then do what? Okay. When at that point, the Allies were moving east, and the Germans were moving west, and they evacuated our camp. And I was they put us out on the road marching for, we marched close to 700 miles. From the time we left camp, I never visited an indoor toilet, never slept in a bed, or anything for the whole 87 days. Never had a bath, full of fleas, lice. It was a miserable journey. But at the end of the time, we got liberated by the British. They told us when Hitler committed suicide, they decided to turn us over. And at that point, then we started marching one afternoon, all that afternoon, all night, and all the next day. Locked us up in a barn, and in the morning, when 6 o'clock, when we woke up, we were surrounded by British tanks, and it liberated us. So that's a picture that you see there. Took me 5 days to get back to a delousing camp, but the picture there you see is a British uniform that they gave us after we got back to the delousing camp. So from there they shipped us to the Le Havre, France, in a hospital about 6 weeks, and then on home, and that ended my journey.
Levi, are you okay to take questions from the audience right now?
Yes.
If anyone has questions, please raise your hands and somebody with a microphone will come close to you.
Well, must have done pretty good.
What was the total amount of time you were in the concentration camp, prisoner of war camp?
Well, about 10 months. Part of it in the concentration camp, part of it on the road. 87 days of it was on the road. Sleeping in barns, outdoors. When we left camp, the odd part of it was we didn't have a knapsack. We didn't have anything to carry utensils in. So what we had to do is take one of our shirts, and you'd pick up the tail end of the shirt and sew it in the front and the buttons, and then pull the sleeves around and stick them in and sew them together so you had a knapsack. And the buttons would be on the back of your back, and that way from the collar part you could slip all your possessions that you could carry with you. Of course, they were meager, and you didn't have much, so that's generally the way it was.
Sir, I wanted to ask, what was your strength? What gave you strength to survive? What was your driving factor in surviving?
Well, in the first thing when you get shot down, you have to use your instincts. And then when it really gets rough and you have time to think about it, then you go back to your core values, your faith, and what it is that makes you tick. And you just reach down and get those factors and keep them foremost in your mind, and that's what sees you through. So faith has had a whole lot to do with it in my situation.
I had one question for you. How was your family contacted? Did the military, when you got back, did the military contact them, or how did you make contact with your family after this?
Well, we had 2 prisoners of war and 1 got killed. So the procedure was at that time, the War Department would send a telegram to your telegraph station nearest you. The telegraph operator then would deliver it to the home. And my mother and father got 3 of those notices. So there wasn't nobody appeared at your door, soldiers or anybody from the military. So one interesting thing, during that period of time, you could tell the status of every home that you along the street. In my case, my mother and dad had 2 blue stars and 1 gold star. The blue stars would indicate prisoners of war. The gold star would indicate one was killed. Now you had a little lamp that you put that in front of your shade, pull the shade down, put it on the street side, illuminate it, and then people passing the street could tell you exactly what the status was in that home. So
Bruce wanted you to explain to everyone how much you weighed when you got home, Caldwell.
well, I weighed 160 pounds when I got shot down, and when I got loose, I weighed 80 pounds.
Wow.
So that was generally the way all POWs ended up, and that's the reason they sent us into the hospital to restore appetites, let's say. So.
Bruce, if I could ask you to come up and join me for just a moment. First of all, Mr. Caldwell, I wanted to, from especially the veterans in the audience, but all of us at Duke Energy, we wanted to thank you. Bruce, thank you for sharing your father here with us. And Ms. Caldwell, congratulations on 65 years. Quite an experience. I'm sure you've lived this a number of times, and it's enjoyable every time. So congratulations and thank you again. And we have something to present you. This is from the employees of Duke Energy. If you'll please take that with our gratitude. And Bruce as well. Thank you very much. I know you have done this a number of times with your father. Thank you again for participating in this.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.